Welcome to National Parks Traveler, where we explore the national parks and the issues that involve them.
Hi, Kurt Repenchek at the National Parks Traveler. Whether this is your first download of our weekly podcasts or number 299, welcome and thank you for listening. We hope you find these episodes interesting and present information or a side to the parks that you previously were unaware of. And frankly, that's the approach we try to take at the Traveler. To not just provide newsworthy information, whether it involves National Park Service funding or hurricane impacts, but also to come up with aspects of the national park system that you might not have been aware of, such as Jennifer Bain's story from Oregon Cave National Monument and Preserve and its collection of purely American Monterey furniture, Barbara Jensen's article from Cuyahoga Valley National Park and the Ohio and Eerie Canal Towpath there, or Sharon McDonald's piece on the Eugene O'Neill National Historic Site in California. I'm joined today by contributors Kim O'Connell and Lynn Riddick to talk about the unusual and at times eclectic content you'll find on The Traveler. We'll be back in a minute with Kim and Lynn.
Acadia National Park is one of the 10 most popular national parks in the United States. It's also one of the smallest and most vulnerable. That's why Friends of Acadia exists. Friends of Acadia is an independent organization of passionate people inspiring those who love this magnificent park to make a real and lasting difference for Acadia. You can make a difference at friendsofacadia.org. The Blue Ridge Parkway Foundation is the primary nonprofit fundraising partner for the Blue Ridge Parkway. It is made up of people who have a deep love for this majestic road and want to ensure that its natural beauty and the experiences it offers endure for generations to come. Show your appreciation at brpfoundation.org. Smokey's Life, full of stunning photography and thought-provoking reads, Smokey's Life Journal is a biannual magazine produced by Smokey's Life, formerly the Great Smoky Mountains Association. Members receive it free of charge each spring and fall, and it is available for purchase in retail stores throughout Great Smoky Mountains National Park and online at smokieslife.org. Listener and reader support make the National Parks Traveler possible every day of the year. If you enjoy the Traveler's content, please consider a donation at nationalparkstraveler.org.
Welcome to The Traveler, ladies.
Kurt.
Hi, Kurt. Hi, Kim. How are you guys doing?
Pretty good. How about you?
Not bad. Still waiting for fall to arrive in San Antonio, Texas, where I am.
Oh, wow.
So maybe 85 degrees today.
Whoa.
That's too bad. We had 4 inches of snow there the day. It was 23 degrees when I got up this morning to take the dog for a walk. It's my kind of weather. So
and I'm right in the middle with about 60 to 70 degrees and full fall color here in the greater Washington, D.C. area.
Boy, we burned through our fall color a couple of weeks ago, maybe longer than that. It's short and fleeting here in the Rockies. Hey, Kim, before we get rolling, you were just down in North Carolina along the Blue Ridge Parkway looking into some of the impacts from Hurricane Helene and what it did to not just the parkway itself, but the economies of local communities that dot the parkway. I know you're still working on finalizing that story, but can you give us a little preview of what you discovered?
Oh, sure. It was a really interesting trip. I stayed in the more northern parts of Western North Carolina. I wanted to be respectful in my visit, and that was already, I guess my visit was 2 weeks ago. And they were still discouraging, non-necessary people from going down to areas that are still heavily, heavily recovering from Hurricane Helene. So I was in the areas of Blowing Rock and Boone, North Carolina, which are both gateway towns to the Blue Ridge Parkway in North Carolina. And while they were not hit quite as hard as, say, the Asheville area and those areas that everybody across the country saw devastating images from, they were nonetheless hit very hard in terms of flooding and downed trees and road closures and just lots of impacts. And the major impact, of course, is the closure of the Blue Ridge Parkway. And I think as the Traveler has been reporting on very well and very regularly since the storm hit, the hurricane necessitated the closure of the entire Blue Ridge Parkway in North Carolina. some sections have opened, sort of in a measured way since then. But when I was there 2 weeks ago, the entire parkway in North Carolina was still closed. And this is in October. I just mentioned the fall color. We were just talking about that. The leaf peepers, that is the major time when people come to the Blue Ridge Parkway, the Great Smoky Mountains, is to come see that beautiful fall color in the, Blue Ridge Mountains. It's absolutely stunning. And their main artery to do that, the Blue Ridge Parkway, was closed. So the impacts on tourism, which is a major economic driver for these national park gateway towns, is completely choked off. I talked to a couple people who said that October is their number one tourist month, and they've had no October. I talked to Bruce O'Connell, who, no relation to me, who is the owner of the Pisgah Inn farther south on the Parkway. I know he's been on the Traveler before, and we've talked about him. And he only has a 7-month season from April 1st to October 31st. And he says that a full 25%, a full quarter of his income for the year comes from the month of October, and he didn't get it this year. And that was a story I just heard repeated over and over again. I interviewed a couple Chamber of Commerce directors and tourism directors and other folks, a couple artists in the Asheville area. And like you said, I'm still putting the whole story together because there's a lot to talk about. But the impacts are great, and it was pretty hard to see it. And without naming names, I'll say that I, interviewed a few people in person, and, several of them broke down, choked up while I was interviewing them. We just met, and it takes a lot to be that emotional with someone you've just met. And that just shows how close to the surface the emotional impacts are of Hurricane Helene. And so, it was a good visit in that I got a lot of information. It's challenging for me to mash it into a story that, is sort of at least hints at the full scope of what they're dealing with down there. But, obviously we can't talk about the national parks without talking about the gateway towns. It's a real symbiotic relationship, and the parks rely on the towns rely on the parks. So, it's just been interesting. But yeah, so I look forward to getting that story done and getting that up for readers really soon.
That really is a devastating impact from the hurricane. And, as you mentioned, I mean, the livelihoods of so many people and communities really depend on the fall color season. And it's going to take a long time to rebound from this, I'm sure. As you noted, the Park Service is working hard to open up more and more sections of the Blue Ridge Parkway in North Carolina. And I know in this past week, they reopened another 50 or 55 miles at least. So they're moving as fast as they can. But, from some of the folks I've talked to, including former superintendents of the Blue Ridge Parkway, people who have lived through previous landslides across the Parkway, it's going to take a long time to get that entire stretch from Great Smoky Mountains up to the Virginia border open again. But, as you mentioned, Kim, it really is a symbiotic relationship between gateway communities and national parks, and you've got that across the country. In the West, you've got gateway communities that struggle with wildfires, whether the fires are burning at their doorstep or there's so much smoke that nobody wants to come visit. We've got another story in the works from Acadia National Park, if you can believe that. There's no wildfires there. There's no hurricanes there, but there's an issue of cruise ships coming to Bar Harbor and disgorging hundreds, if not thousands, of passengers a day to head up to the top of Cadillac Mountain, and the impacts that's having on the town and the park to a certain extent. And so really looking forward to what the writer comes back to me with in terms of that. It's been a really controversial issue in Bar Harbor, and different factions, the town council. Boy, you couldn't make up a story like that. One thing about the national parks, there's never a dull moment in the national park system. There's never a lack of stories for us to pursue. When I started the Traveler back in 2005, it was because there's so many interesting stories out there. And, as I said in the introduction, one thing we really try and do is bring the expected content, hurricane recovery impacts, but also the unexpected. As I mentioned, some of those stories in the introduction. Lynn, you had an interesting, atypical national park story in last week's podcast about these 4 women who had donated kidneys, and then to raise awareness for living kidney donations, they pedaled their bikes the entire 444 miles of the Natchez Trace Parkway. I mean, just fascinating.
Yeah, that was a really interesting story. There were 4 women, like you said, and they were strangers. One of them sort of reached out on a Facebook page dedicated to athletes who are also kidney donors and was looking for some people to sort of join her in this effort to raise awareness. And she found 3 other women. And I talked to 2 of them in the podcast that was posted this past Sunday. And their story is really incredible because, first of all, the Natchez Trace goes from Nashville, Tennessee to Natchez, Mississippi, and it's 447 miles. And they biked the whole thing in 4 days. I just can't even imagine that. And, it's not an easy pedal. It's rolling, it's mountainous, but it's also beautiful. And they talked about how beautiful the journey was. And it was such a nice place to do this little awareness raising campaign. They were joined in their journey by other cyclists, by other kidney donors that came out and wanted to meet them. And it was just, I think it was so admirable and so amazing to pull this off. And I know that I couldn't do that, but I sure have a piqued interest about the Natchez Trace Parkway now, because I haven't been there. And it just sounds like a glorious place that's full of American history and full of vibrant ecosystems and beautiful nature, and sounds like a really nice place to get out and take a look at. And one thing I found really interesting is that they said that they were passed and saw very little vehicular traffic. So if you're a cyclist, that sounds like kind of a really interesting place to go and explore. And maybe you don't do the whole 444 miles, but you sure might be inspired by listening to these women's stories, and all of them kidney donors themselves.
National parks can be so inspirational in so many different facets of our lives. And, that's just a perfect example, a highly unusual one. I can't imagine it. Although, Lynn, I'll have to tell you, I would love to try and pedal the whole thing in 4 days or maybe a week. But I have a sense that's be on your to-do list pretty soon, visiting the parkway. I don't know if you want to pedal the whole thing.
No. I'd be happy to just take it all in a vehicle, a car. That'd be a nice drive.
I don't know if you planned this, Kurt, but all of these parks we've talked about are linear parks. And I think that's a really interesting aspect of the national park system. You mentioned Cuyahoga Valley, and I know you'll probably come back to that, and the Natchez Trace Parkway and the Blue Ridge Parkway. What I love about long linear national parks is because they do go through such varied landscapes, a lot of history, a lot of culture. And that's one of the many things I really loved about your podcast, Lynn, was how amazed these bike riders were about the history that they were, riding past. It was, maybe they expected the nature part of it, but it seems like it was less expected to come across all the history. And having just come back from the Blue Ridge Parkway, obviously down in the Smoky Mountains, the Blue Ridge Mountains, like there's so much cultural history that's wrapped up in these, linear paths that also pass through these incredible natural landscapes. So I think that's a really cool aspect of our park system, is it's not just you go to one place. Some parks are like that. They're just like one place. And of course, they're big, but a linear park kind of takes you through history in a different way. And I really love that.
It certainly does. And, one of the beauties of both the Natchez Trace Parkway and the Blue Ridge Parkway is they were designed to offer motors a meandering path across the landscapes. The speed limit is kept down. I believe 55 might be the maximum speed limit. They ban commercial traffic. Your semi-trucks, you're not supposed to encounter them, although from time to time the rangers find commercial traffic and they ticket them on those parkways. But just, beautiful swaths of America and Americana. I grew up on the East Coast, and so I have some experience with the Blue Ridge Parkway. But like Lynn, I've never been to the Natchez Trace Parkway, but boy, am I tempted. I've been tempted to go there for a long time, and I just might have to pick up the truck and the camper and spend a little time on the road getting to know some of these more far-flung parks.
Yeah, and what I tend to say to myself whenever I'm in a national park is, wow, somebody or a group of people had the foresight to set aside this beautiful place for all of us to enjoy. And I like that about the National Parks Traveler website because we are able to cover the issues that are a threat to these places. We don't want these places to be threatened. So we got to know what's out there troubling them. And I think that the Traveler does a great job showing us some of these issues that we can tackle better.
We do try and offer the type of national parks coverage that you won't find anywhere else in America. To the best of my knowledge, there is no other news outlet that focuses every day of the year on national park coverage. And it's not just to keep people informed about the day-to-day news that impacts the national parks, but also to show them a lot of the park units that don't get covered by the rest of the media across the country. I mean, there's over 430 units of the national park system, and how many people know about the Natchez Trace Parkway, let alone hear a story about it, or the Ohio and Erie Canal, Towpath, and Cuyahoga Valley National Park. And for the next 2 months, we're joining a national campaign called Newsmatch, which is aimed at raising charitable dollars for nonprofit news media. Because today we've lost a lot of news organizations over the past 2 decades, and there really are a lot of news deserts out there. And I can't think of a bigger news desert when you talk about national parks coverage, because to the best of my knowledge, the Traveler is the only organization, for-profit or nonprofit, that works every day of the year to tell these stories about the undiscovered jewels in the national park system and to talk about recovery in the wake of a hurricane or how the Park Service can get more money to better police the parks and better make it a great vacation for visitors.
I think it's important to stress again that the Traveler is a nonprofit organization, a media organization that covers news and information in the national parks and protected areas. So when you have a nonprofit designation, you're guided by a board of directors, you have a mission statement, and you adhere to these principles that were part of your founding.
And one of the exciting things about the upcoming Newsmatch campaign, which actually started this past Friday, is that we've got a couple organizations and individuals that have stepped up to help us raise money with matching grants, and we'll be talking about those on the Traveler in the coming weeks. But through this Newsmatch campaign, if you sign up from now until the end of the year to make monthly recurring donations, whether it's $5 a month or $50 a month, Newsmatch will match it 12 times. So say you sign up to give us $10 a month, Newsmatch will give us $120 as a match. They'll take a look at the whole year and match that. And if you make a one-time gift, say you make a $500 gift or a $1,500 gift, Newsmatch will match it up to $1,000. So your $500 will turn into $1,000 for us. Your $1,500 will turn into $2,500 because, as I mentioned, they'll only match up to $1,000. But still, it's an incredible boost to nonprofit media, whether it's the Traveler or the hundreds of other nonprofit news organizations across the country.
That's incredibly generous. That's amazing. And I know that the Travel is very thrifty with the money it takes in and very careful with expenditures. You can trust that your dollars are going to be well spent. And that match is amazing.
And through the whole Newsmatch campaign, if we raise at least $15,000, they'll match $15,000. And, when you look at nonprofit news, that's a small amount. I mean, $15,000 or $30,000 a year is not enough to keep an organization like the Traveler going. And you're absolutely right, Lynn. We don't spend the money willy-nilly. What we do is reinvest that money in our contributors to get them out on the road, whether it's Kim going down to the Blue Ridge Parkway to look at how towns are recovering from the hurricane disaster down there, or Marcus Wolf up in Acadia National Park talking to the community there about the value of cruise ships. Is it really necessary for the economic vitality of the town, or is it really a detriment to the national park experience? And we tell those stories year after year after year, month after month after month. And unfortunately, it does cost money. It costs money to put gas in your tank. It costs money to have a laptop, to have a recorder. And it's a worthwhile expenditure, I'd like to say. If you look back, gosh, over the past 19 years of the Traveler, all the stories that we've done, and some of the fun stories that we've done that hopefully opened your eyes, the listeners here, about what they can do in the national parks. I mean, Kim, you well know going down to Everglades National Park and wading up to our hips in Cypress Dome. That was just a fascinating experience that I had no idea was available until we went down there.
Yeah, and I did the same thing in Cypress National Preserve. Slogged around and saw the swamp and the Cypress Dome and all the wildlife down there. Was really a nice little experience that I wouldn't have known about had Kurt not done pieces about Big Cypress National Preserve.
What I think one of the great values of the Traveler is that we provide information for our readers that want to go see national parks. We want them to go travel to national parks. Obviously, we want them to learn about these incredible places and visit them themselves, and we give them information that helps them do that. But none of us can go everywhere. So what I love also about the Traveler is the armchair experience, that readers can go onto our site and read about just so many places that they may never get to themselves. And so they get a wonderful, immersive, on the ground armchair experience where they get to ride along with us if we are down in the Everglades or in the Great Smoky Mountains or all the places that our writers have gone to, because we want to share that with them. And so obviously that requires money. That requires money to fund those research trips and those reporting trips so that we can bring those stories to people and either inspire them to go to those places themselves, or at least give them that vicarious experience where they're riding along with us on our shoulders as we do that work and slog through those, wet swamps and all those cool places. And I think that's really important.
There are really endless stories. As I mentioned earlier, there's more than 430 units in the national park system. And while we can't tackle them all this month or this year, we are slowly chipping away at them. I know, Kim, you've got some really interesting stories lined up that we want to tackle, going down to Jamestown, historic Jamestown, and taking a look at sea level rise and the threats that it posed to that park.
Yes, absolutely. And just this summer, I was at Cape Hatteras reporting for the Traveler, as we talked about previously, talking about the impacts of climate change and sea level rise. And of course, everybody knows about the houses along Cape Hatteras National Seashore that have been falling into the ocean. And we've had a lot of coverage on that. But Cape Hatteras is just one place among many along the coast that is deeply impacted and will continue to be deeply impacted by sea level rise and other impacts from climate change. Jamestown is a major one because it is so incredibly important to our cultural history. In terms of archaeology and archaeological history, it's vastly important, and those resources are threatened by sea level rise. So I look forward to going down there and talking with those folks about what if anything they can do to protect, still uncovered archaeological resources at Jamestown and the ones that have been uncovered. So that is a story that's going to be coming soon as well.
And as they say, news is power. Out here in the West, in the Rocky Mountains, the state of Utah is trying to get the federal government to turn over all the BLM lands in the state, the Bureau of Land Management lands in the state. I think roughly 60% or so of Utah is federal landscape, whether it's BLM lands or national forest or national parks. Utah, the officials here are just have their eyes on BLM lands. However, in Wyoming next door, they are signing on to Utah's effort to leverage the federal government to get those lands back. In Wyoming, they also are talking about possibly taking over the national parks, and that should be an issue important to every park lover, no matter where you live. In many regards, it's a frightening possibility to see these places turned over to the states, not necessarily because the states can't operate them, but imagine if each of the 50 states took over their national parks and the experience and how it would change from state to state as you traveled?
I mean, we have a wonderful state park systems in the country, and I think we all recognize and appreciate the state parks in our country. And I know I go to my local Virginia state parks all the time, but what I've always loved about the national park system is this idea of national significance, that these places are important to people beyond a state border. Imagine if we would say or try to indicate to people that Yellowstone belonged only to Wyoming or Great Smoky Mountains belonged only to North Carolina or Tennessee. Well, it straddles those two states, so they'd fight over that. But they're justified in feeling a sense of ownership, but we all feel a sense of ownership over these national parks, as we should. They belong to all of us. And so that's a really interesting issue to talk about, is what is a national park and why is it important? And I think that's kind of the overarching question that the traveler answers all the time.
Yeah, and Kurt, you've done a couple of editorials in the last month about the feral horses on Cumberland Island National Seashore in Georgia. Tell us a little bit about that. How are you following that? What's going on?
Boy, talk about a controversial issue. The Park Service really struggles when it comes to feral horses. You know, at Cumberland Island National Seashore, you have 100 or 150 feral horses that they trace them back to, I think, the 1700s, when Cumberland Island was settled and had some agrarian interests, you know, plantations or farms and whatnot. And so the horses were workhorses or whatnot, and they descended there down through the years. And as the owners moved off the island, they left the livestock behind. And along with feral horses, they also have feral hogs there. Hogs aren't as warm and fuzzy as feral horses are, and so the Park Service on Cumberland Island has been trying to get rid of the hogs because of the damage they do to the ecosystem there and the threats they pose to the native species like loggerhead sea turtles or piping plovers. The horses do just as much damage, if not more. They're bigger, they eat more, they poop more. There are piles of horse manure on Cumberland Island, and yet the Park Service has been extremely reluctant. In fact, they're fighting a lawsuit to remove those horses, not just for the sake of the lawsuit aims to remove the horses, not just for the sake of the environment there, the ecology on Cumberland Island, but also for the sake of the horses. They're malnourished, and it's really tough living for a horse there. And I believe they've said that on average, the horses on Cumberland Island live to be about 9 or 10, roughly a third of what they might live on more appropriate setting. Why the Park Service is fighting to remove those horses, I don't know. There's not a lot of public outcry over the proposal to remove the horses. Now you travel across the country to Theodore Roosevelt National Park in North Dakota. You also have feral horses there. It's been demonstrated that they're not native. It's been thousands of years since there were native horses on North America. And yet there has been an overwhelming public outcry over the proposal to remove the horses from Theodore Roosevelt. And North Dakota's congressional delegation and their governor have spoken out against removing the horses. And so the Park Service is sitting pat and not even talking anymore about removing the horses. There was a plan to remove some of the horses earlier this fall, and they've since reversed direction, and they're not talking about removing horses. So it's a real delicate issue, and I'm not sure exactly what the Park Service should do. Should they just come down with a blanket statement that we're not going to tolerate feral animals, whether they're hogs or horses, and we're going to remove them from national parks, or we're going to take it on a park-by-park basis, which seems to be the preferred approach?
The horses are an issue at Cape Hatteras too, because there's a penned group of horses on Ocracoke Island on the southern part of Cape Hatteras National Seashore, and I reported on that for the Traveler this summer as well. And the issue there is that, you know, people still have a mythology around horses, assuming that they're running free through the surf. But at Ocracoke, they live their lives inside a penned area for their own safety and for the protection of other aspects of Ocracoke. And so the Park Service is grappling with whether these horses should continue to be their responsibility or not. And there are strong feelings on all sides about that. So that's another place that we're paying attention to.
Yeah, another Similar situation in Assateague Island National Seashore and Chincoteague National Seashore. In Assateague, the Park Services manages the wild horses there. In Chincoteague, they let them go free. They're up to their own devices, and they do auctions every year of the horses. So different places, different scenarios, different feelings about the wild horses. But we try to keep up with all that at the Traveler.
Gives you a whole new definition of seahorses, doesn't it? Again, we're just launching the Newsmatch campaign. It runs through December 31st, and we really rely on reader and listener support to keep the Traveler going. And if you appreciate these types of stories, whether it's a specific issue that is important to you or one that you didn't know about, or you appreciate our coverage of the unknown, the unspoken gems of the national park system, like the Natchez Trace Parkway, or Fort Larned National Historic Site in Kansas, or Tallgrass Prairie National Preserve. Lynn, we've both been to Tallgrass Prairie National Preserve in Kansas. What a wonderful place, no?
Yeah, it was very secluded when I went. It was probably a couple of years ago, about this time of year. I think it was October. And I just passed very few people, maybe two, when I was out hiking the trails. Really, I think I spent 3 days there just wandering around, checking out the birds, checking out the many woodpeckers and northern flickers. And it was just a really nice little place, really off the beaten path, but very refreshing to go somewhere that I hadn't even thought about going to before, even though I worked in Kansas for a while.
Tallgrass is, it's a place I've long wanted to go because they've got a bison herd there, and I've got a thing about bison if you're familiar with what I've been doing over the past 15 or 20 years. But not only the bison really stand out there at Tallgrass Prairie, but the Tallgrass Prairie. I mean, once upon a time, I think 170 million acres or so of North America was Tallgrass Prairie, and we're down to, I don't know, what is it, 4%, Lynn, do you recall?
I do not recall.
It's a single digit percentage-wise of Tallgrass Prairie is left. And you can go to this national preserve in Kansas and see it like it used to be and just walk through it. And unfortunately, Lynn, I went from a different time that you did. And when I went there, it might have been knee-high prairie. And I think when you went there, it was 5 or 6 foot high prairie. And just to walk through that and just imagine what most of Middle America looked like 200 years ago, just boggles the mind.
Yeah, and there were many original age-old bison wallows that were untouched since the very first bison herds roamed that part of the continent. So that was kind of exciting to see.
In Wyoming, on the Wind River Indian Reservation, I was talking to a gentleman there who was managing the bison herd, and he was telling me that there are wallows there that go back over a century. When you think about it, there might have been anywhere between 30 or 60 million bison on North America before Christopher Columbus showed up here. And, just imagining herds that big and the impact they have on the landscape. And it's not a negative impact. I mean, it's been demonstrated that bison are good for the landscape because, they move across it quickly and they don't kind of stay in one place, but they kind of rototill the landscape to the benefit of native vegetation and lots of wildlife from birds and other animals that benefit from what the bison do coming through. But to see these vignettes of America, I think it's indescribable of what you can find in the national park system and what the National Park Service strives to protect.
One feature of National Parks Traveler is the annual stories on threatened and endangered parks. And that's something that Kurt researches very thoroughly. And those articles can give you a very good perspective of some of the real threats that we're facing. Kurt, you want to talk a little bit more about that?
For a long time, I've watched other organizations like American Rivers comes out with its most endangered rivers. Every year they come out with an annual report. Some of the history organizations come out with the most threatened historic sites in America. And I thought, why doesn't anybody talk about the national parks and the threats that they face? Obviously, there are myriad threats that the parks face, from, frankly, overvisitation to hurricanes, as we're seeing more and more potent hurricanes. And so there's just a lot.
Burmese pythons in the Everglades.
Absolutely, absolutely. And so some years ago, we started our annual Threatened and Endangered Parks series, which is a year-end package of story that looks out across the national park system at some of the issues that threaten to bring impacts to national parks. Kim came up with a really interesting one a couple of years ago. Actually, she came up with, she always comes up with good ideas. One of them was light pollution, which you may not think too much about. Another one was, I think it was heavier precipitation in the Southwest and what that was doing to some of the historic ruins there. Kim, what can you tell us about those?
Yeah, the light pollution just happens to be something that I've always been interested in because I love the night sky. So, especially living in an urban area, I live right outside Washington, D.C., and I feel like my sky disappears more and more every year. And so for me personally, going to the national parks is one way to experience natural darkness and a true night sky. And I've just always found that so magical. I know that, Lynn, you've interviewed Tyler Nordgren, who's really associated with the night sky posters that he's done and sort of outreach about preventing light pollution and things like that. And he's a really neat guy. So I wanted to talk about that. But it's, a lot of these issues that we bring up in the Threatened and Endangered series, we might focus on it one year, but they tend to be perennial issues. So it's a challenge for us, I know, to pick which parks in any given year are going to be on our threatened and endangered parks list, because light pollution is still an issue. I mean, there are definitely some places that have taken steps to protect national parks. Acadia is, Bar Harbor and Acadia are one of them who've put a lot of effort into that. But that's an ongoing issue, and one that I'll look at again when we're talking about this year's list. But it is a challenge for us to pick a list of the most threatened and endangered parks, which is kind of a sad commentary because there are so many threats to the national parks. So I think we try to pick a representative list, and we consider, what breaking news might be happening and that kind of thing. And, of course, we're talking about threatened and endangered parks all year long on The Traveler. That's kind of part and parcel of a lot of our coverage. But what I like about this particular annual series is that it just shines a hot spotlight on places and kind of really brings attention to things that maybe people aren't paying attention to all year long or thinking about that often. So I look forward to seeing what we come up with this year and see whether, light pollution makes it back on the list or whether it's farther down because we have so many other pressing issues to talk about.
I found out by talking to the superintendent, now retired, at Big Bend National Park that, Big Bend is amazing when you talk about a dark sky and the vividness of the stars. I cannot underscore how amazing it is. But the superintendent told me in an interview while I was there that even that's under threat because the popularity of the park has led to more development in the little town outside the park called Lajitas, and more development means more lights, more restaurants, more shops, more headlights. And so it's a crazy balance, right? Because we all want to go and see the beautiful skies, but then we need a place to stay and we need a car to get there. So, we cover these issues very well, I think, in both editorial content written and also our podcasts.
A couple of issues, Kim, you mentioned that a lot of them are recurring, and that's true to a certain extent. But one I think we're going to take a look at this year is, we have to do something about covering hurricanes and the impacts that these hurricanes have to the national park system. So certainly, places like the Blue Ridge Parkway, parts of Great Smoky Mountains National Park, a lot of park units in South Carolina, and some others in North Carolina. You look at the Outer Banks, the National Seashores there, the National Seashore in Georgia, Cumberland Island. They're all at risk from hurricanes. And so I'm going to task you with a year-end piece on that. Another one that really hits the pocketbooks, so to speak, or quite literally hits the pocketbooks of visitors to the national park system, is the ever rising cost of exploring and visiting a national park. David and Kay Scott, who long-running experts on lodging in the national parks, they've written guides for more than a decade or two on lodging in the national parks, did a piece for The Traveler not too long ago on the rising costs of room rates in national parks and how it has eclipsed the consumer price index by quite a bit. And it's also eclipsed the cost of staying in a motel elsewhere in the country outside the national parks. And so I'm going to have one of our writers take a look at the economic impact and what is that threat to the national parks, because the parks need people. The parks need people to come visit them and fall in love with them and become stewards for them. They also need people to visit, so they'll spend some money. They shouldn't have to spend a year's worth of money to go visit a national park. You shouldn't be expected to spend $400 or $500 a night to go enjoy a national park that Congress holds in the public's trust.
One thing I've always loved about the national parks is kind of how they hold up democratic principles. I mean, lowercase d democratic, meaning that they're an equalizing thing for the American people. And for a long time, the national parks were a relatively affordable way to take a vacation. That's kind of how my modest family of origin, the one I grew up in, that's how we got our annual vacations. We went to national parks because it was affordable for my single father. And so there's part of me that, is saddened when I hear about, prices going up and making parks out of reach for a lot of people, because there is this wonderful equalizing effect that the national park system has. At the same time, post-COVID, everything is more expensive. So everybody's sort of squeezed from all sides, and having just come back from, doing some reporting on the economic impacts of these hurricanes, like we talked about already. Like, I understand that these businesses need to, there's a supply and demand thing going on. They have to keep up with the Joneses and with their neighbors. And, so it's a difficult thing. So I really do look forward to seeing what we talk about there, because I want to make sure that we can keep these parks accessible to as many people as possible.
And that's a role that we really take to heart here at The Traveler, is making sure that, the American public who owns these special places knows how they're being managed, knows what impacts they're facing, so they can speak up and try and help the Park Service do a better job, whether it's getting more funding for the Park Service so they can do a better job on the ground, or, somehow raise the level of pay for Park Service employees who are vastly underpaid, or get better housing for them. So we hope that you really appreciate the coverage that we bring to you, whether it's informative as far as the impacts or the threats to these national parks, or that you've discovered a unit of the national park system that you hadn't considered before to visit and manage to get out to it and have a wonderful time. If you really value this coverage, we hope that you'll step up in the next 8 weeks and make a donation to the National Parks Traveler, whether it's a one-time donation or as a recurring supporter of the Traveler. We are a 501c3 nonprofit news organization, and so your donation can be tax deductible as far as the tax laws allow. But at the end of the day, we hope that you share our passion for these special places and really appreciate our coverage and want to see it continue. Now, you can donate online. We've got donate buttons you can click, and it'll take you to a donate form. Or if you prefer to send us a check, you can reach us at P.O. Box 980452 in Park City, Utah, zip code 84098.
I've enjoyed talking with you two as usual, and it's always fun and interesting to talk about what's going on at the Traveler. And I know that folks are getting inundated with fundraising requests due to the elections happening. But if you can carve out just a little bit for us, your money would really go far in protecting our national parks.
I agree.
Well, thanks so much for joining me today, Lynn and Kim. It's been fun as always, and looking forward to further discussions about some of these magnificent places that have incredible stories to share with America's public. Thank you for listening and making the National Parks Traveler one of your information sources. There are so many incredible places in the National Park System, and we're working to see that you learn about them. Your support can help ensure that coverage not only doesn't go away, but grows broader and broader. If you can, please donate during the Newsmatch campaign that runs through the end of the year, and encourage others who love and value the national parks to support the Traveler as well. You can donate online at nationalparkstraveler.org or send a check to Post Office Box 980452, Park City, Utah 84098. For the Traveler, this is Kurt Repenchek. See you in the parks.
The composers and musicians at Orange Tree Productions have created a unique collection known as the National Park Series that has grown to include more than 30 CD titles. Composed against the backdrop of a park's sounds of nature, these musical scores will connect you with these beautiful places and take you there, at least in your mind. This collection is the #1 selling National Park audio series in the world and provides the background music for National Parks Travelers podcasts. Visit them at orangetreeproductions.com. Editing and production work for the National Parks Traveler podcast is done by Splitbeard Productions. You can learn more about us at splitbeardproductions.com. National Parks Traveler is a 501c3 nonprofit media organization that provides daily editorial coverage of national parks and protected areas. Traveler's coverage is made possible by reader and listener donations. Visit us at nationalparkstraveler.org.